Thank you all for meeting with us today. You may already know me, as the chair has invited me to join your board. If you don't know me, my name is Brent Barnes, General Director at Doctors Without Borders. I'm joined today by Jackson Hobbs, audit partner at Hobbs & Associates, whom I've hired as a consulting firm, and Mr. Cody Beck, Hobbs' manager of nonprofit accounts. Mr. Hobbs and Mr. Beck helped me complete some due diligence at your district in Madrid. And I'd like to start by sharing with you a few surprises that we found during our visit, things the chair and CFO both did not know about. If you'll please turn to page 2. This is a different little dynamic here. Out of 10 donations we looked at, one had restrictions on spending which the district manager didn't seem aware of. Another was an in-kind donation with a fair value just written in without any documentation to support it. That could seriously hurt your donor's trust, put revenues in the wrong periods, or even threaten your 501c3 status. Please turn to page 3. Here, you can see payments for medical procedures. There's a wide range of balances for surgery versus medicine versus care packages, as well as the number of patients. While range isn't necessarily a problem, it can signal a lack of policy for what's necessary and a lack of sharing best practices and concerns. I understand the benefit of local decision-making. Doctors Without Borders operates much the same way. But local decision-making does not and should not mean no questions, no sharing, no oversight, or no rules. Please turn to page 4. Here, we can see the above-market pricing on care package items compared to vendor donations. Vendor costs in excess of market are the dark bars in the back, and donations from those vendors are the gray bars in the front. Take a look at Gifty Things. See how much more that district is paying for that product and how little it's affected donations. My point here with all this is that you've grown. It's not just the founder running things anymore. Never Give Up has some serious weaknesses, and we'll talk about 3 of those weaknesses today. But there will be more, which is why the board needs a process to constantly identify, address, and monitor risks. And that process is the COSO framework. Mr. Beck is an expert on this framework, and he'll tell you very briefly about it. Mr. Beck?
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. You'll see a very brief overview of COSO's framework on page 5. This starts with 1, cultivate the tone at the top. 2, identify risks and opportunities. 3, decide how to address those points. 4, communicate them across the organization. And 5, check to see if the process put in place is working. Basically, this is your blueprint for success. So where does the board fit into this picture? Right at the top. You would participate in this process, monitor it, and ensure it gets done. If you don't care, they won't either. How would the board get this done? The audit committee, management, and internal audit staff, working together. A competent internal auditor would advise management as they build the process, and then monitor the process going forward to provide independent assurance that the process is in place and working. So enough about addressing risks in general, let's get down to specifics. Mr. Barnes will now cover the first and most pressing weakness, governance. Mr. Barnes?
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Please turn to page 6. Now, about those governance issues. For one, your audit committee is not independent of management. Fixing that is important. Why? If there are disagreements with management, the auditor, internal or external, needs a way to resolve the dispute by coming to the audit committee, a committee that does not also include management. It's the audit committee that hires and supervises both external and internal auditors. But if management is on the audit committee, then the auditor has no recourse to the committee when management disputes come up. Now let's talk about your CAE. He's not following internal audit standards. For instance, he hasn't brought the audit committee's lack of independence to your attention. That violates Standard 1110, which requires the CAE to report at least annually to the board to confirm that the 2 reporting lines, management and the audit committee, are still separate. Also, as a former partner of the external auditor, is he receiving a pension check from them? Standard 1120 forbids even an appearance of a conflict of interest. Also, he doesn't have an audit plan in place that prioritizes risks by urgency, which violates Standard 2010, and the list really goes on and on. So, even more troubling that your CFO and CAE have ignored the need for even basic controls. For instance, simple controls, like authorizing new vendors to assure that payments go only to valid medical facilities, is just not in place. Just 2 years ago, the UK's National Health Service lost hundreds of thousands of pounds from payments to fake vendors. That kind of mistake can kill your organization. Your CFO and CAE, if they were following Standard 1230, continuing professional development, should know and have explained the advantages of a minimum level of controls and a risk-based audit plan, one that prioritizes risks in order of urgency. There are no controls surrounding financial reports and no operational reports to help you track activity against your strategies. And the data we brought from our visit to Madrid should not have been breaking news. So without boring you with a longer list, suffice it to say you would not pass the external assessment of your internal audit function as required by Standard 1312. What does that tell you? That your current governance structure is not protecting you from much. Good governance means fewer surprises, a risk-based audit plan, visibility about your organization's strategic objectives, in short, critical feedback you're not getting now. Weak governance, on the other hand, puts all of your activities at risk. Your tone at the top is the strongest signal of your expectations, and so it shows your commitment or lack of commitment to addressing risks, protecting your organization, and chasing opportunities. For the second major issue, I'll refer you to our audit expert, Mr. Jackson Hobbs.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Let's talk about the district managers. Please turn to page 7. As Mr. Barnes said, with a decentralized approach, you need controls in place, allowing some oversight on your district managers because they have a concentration of duties. As it stands, district managers have no oversight. They receive, record, authorize, pay, and reconcile all the cash flows for their district. And with only one employee, segregating duties is difficult, so internal audit can advise management on control measures to help curb opportunities for errors and misconduct. But let's play this out a bit. Currently, there's nothing in place to stop them, the district managers, from receiving a $250 cash donation, but recording a $200 donation. Sure, they have to report their operating results to the CFO. Those reports are generated using numbers the district managers themselves record. It doesn't even have to be fraudulent. You might have a district manager who's so passionate for the cause that they determine every procedure to be necessary, even if that isn't always so. As you saw earlier, procedure funding is anything but uniform. Policies can give guidance and enhance decisions and consistency, and these policies can reflect the philosophy of the founder. We're not altering that aspect. We're just making sure the founder's vision is really happening. Also, district managers may not be the best ones to code costs. Your CEO already sees errors in coding. Distribution is a program cost and not administrative. But if account classifications were done by corporate instead of district managers, these errors may be avoided altogether. Internal audit can provide independent assurance that important transactions are documented, medical procedures reflect the mission, and all resources are going to authorized vendors. Internal audit can also advise management as it designs controls to prevent or detect the misuse of funds, be it intentional or accidental, and to observe their effectiveness, and to report deficiencies to the board. Now I'll let our manager of nonprofit accounts, Mr. Cody Beck, go over the third major issue. Mr. Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. The last major issue we see is the spending policies. I know you're not accountants, well, most of you are, but in the spending area, you're mostly flying blind. Please turn to page 8. Let's talk about benchmarking against other successful not-for-profits. In a BDO benchmarking survey in 2017, over 70% of nonprofits had a formal spending policy. You do not. Localizing spending decisions doesn't mean that district managers should be free from having to report outcomes. You see, outcomes are the way if you know if spending is fruitful and mission-aligned. About your administrative costs, please turn to page 9. As you can see, 25% is fairly high compared to similar not-for-profits. Internal audit can help you find out why you're out of line with the industry. Administrative costs is not the only thing you should be tracking, though. In that same BDO survey, 76 to 100% of survey respondents indicate that donors and funding sources want more information, but you're not even providing basic information to yourselves. How can you provide it to outsiders who may consider supporting you? These won't be the only 3 risks you ever face. Please turn to page 10 where you'll find a risk map. We prioritize risk based on severity and the probability of occurrence. And this map should be updated regularly in collaboration with field managers, corporate, and the board. So let's summarize our ideas. Please turn to page 11. Under governance, you'll see many bullets. I won't read them, but they're the big ideas in governance, such as hiring a full-time CAE that follows standards, getting management off the audit committee, and creating a code of ethics. Internal audit would then verify that these are implemented. Next page. The concentration of duties. Without adding anyone in the field, you can segregate 5 items and strengthen your controls considerably. You could set up new vendors at corporate, send donor receipts from corporate, code payments at corporate, value in-kind donations at corporate, and let the managers request payments, but write the checks at corporate. An internal audit would do walkthroughs and random testing so that you get independent verification that the process is working as intended. Next page. Spending policies and benchmarking. To review, management would study why the 25% admin cost is so much higher than the industry. They would make sure that local vendors are donating, and they would suggest financial and operational reports to monitor practice, outcomes, and exceptions. And then internal audit provides assurance on financial and operational reporting and looks for opportunities or unusual patterns. Mr. Barnes is now going to wrap up for us. Mr. Barnes?
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Now, I know this conversation has been a bit of a downer for you, but don't get me wrong. I came to you this way not because I don't want to be a part of this, but because I do. You have the chance to do a lot of good in the world, and I'm honored by the chance to help. But you won't be doing anyone any good if you don't take your risks more seriously. Remember the National Health Service. Can you afford $1 million mistake? Why do you need full-time internal audit? A single part-time officer, even one compliant with internal audit standards, is not enough anymore. There's still a lot missing. Overlooked donor restrictions, misclassifications, errors in your financial statements, no clear picture of your operations, possibilities for misconduct you might not even know about. And because you're decentralized, because each district is acting on its own, you need that much more assurance that everyone is in line with the mission. Internal audit minimizes surprises and maximizes successes through consultation and independent assurance. Once you take that step to protect and enhance yourself, then I will be glad to accept your invitation to join in your mission. Thank you.